Hello, my name is Joshua Gilliland, and I am one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. I love going to San Diego Comic-Con. We started going in 2015, and the last decade's been awesome. The following recording is from our Daredevil Born Again panel, recorded live on July 25th, 2025. This panel was a ton of fun, and here's a wild card. I'm not on it. This is the first time I didn't moderate a panel at San Diego Comic-Con, and I did it for a simple reason. I wanted to be sure another person had a chance to be on a legal panel, because we have a bunch of lawyers and judges that want to participate. Kate Bridal moderated and did a great job. So now let's tune in and check out our Daredevil Born Again panel from San Diego Comic-Con 2025.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the law of Daredevil Born Again with the Legal Geeks. I am Kate Bridal. I will be your moderator. And it's really special because 10 years ago, actually, the Legal Geeks made our first appearance here at San Diego Comic-Con. We were right next door, number 26. So we're so happy to be here. Thanks to our fearless leader, Josh Gilliland.
Hi folks, I'm Judge Carol Najera. I was a prosecutor for 3 years before I came onto the bench. I've been a judge for 10 years in the hub city of Compton. I think I've been a legal geek about that long too, and it's just a pleasure to be here and see all you guys. Some of you I recognize, and hi all.
Hi, I'm Danna Nicholas, and I was sworn in on the bench in the same year in 2023. Prior to that, I was an attorney at the city, so I love being part of Legal Geeks, and so hopefully I get to see you all again. We've done some work here at Comic-Con and at WonderCon and Comic Fest, so this is going to be great.
Hi, I'm Micheal Skeen. I'm an attorney practicing in San Francisco. This is my first panel with the Legal Geeks, and very happy to be here. Please be gentle with the questions. It's my first time, and lover of everything geek, and happy to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Katrina. I'm an associate attorney at Best Krieger. I practice environmental law. This is maybe my third or fourth Legal Geeks panel, so I'm happy to be back.
And I'm John Owens. I'm a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Apparently, I'm Jacqueline's father. And the Chamber's here in San Diego, and I read Daredevil as a kid, and so I still have the box upstairs with the death of Elektra still in the box. Not selling it.
Yes, don't ask. That's not a valid question. All right. So let's kick things off with Judge
He's the Joker to Daredevil's Batman, Lex Luthor to the Superman. I mean, he is the arch enemy. In the comics, the things would say that in his hands, anything is a deadly weapon. So he really is just absolutely deadly. And he has inflicted more damage on Daredevil's life than pretty much anyone. He's Benjamin Poindexter in the TV show, or Lester from the comics. Interesting, the two characterizations have diverged. The comics version, he's got all sorts of possible histories, but in the TV show, he's actually a federal agent, which is very, we won't get too far into that, but it creates an interesting dynamic to his characterization. So, as I said, he's done more damage to Daredevil than anyone else. Judge Owens referenced Daredevil 181, which is a turning point certainly for many people growing up in the 80s because it saw the death of Elektra. I don't think I'm spoiling that. It is bigger now. But he has killed Elektra. He has killed Karen Page in the Guardian Devil run for Kevin Smith. He also killed Ian Donovan in what was sort of a dream sequence under Brian Michael Bendis' run. Again, another fantastic comic run. But if anyone sort of, really you think could be, or maybe should be, if you believe that villains should be put away forever or killed or whatnot, Bullseye would probably be the poster child. But we're not asking that question. We're actually asking, Bullseye sues Daredevil for beating him up repeatedly, and in this case, in the opening sequence of the Netflix show, Daredevil defeats Bullseye after seeing Clyde Nelson's longtime best friend and die. And, he senses it in the heartbeat. And he sees Clyde die. He beats Bullseye and throws him off the top of the building. So, can Bullseye sue Daredevil for those injuries? Can I get a show of hands? Who thinks yes? Okay, all right. So, nuanced questions here. Can he sue? Yes, he can sue. Will he win? That might be a little bit different. But it also may be a closer question than one may believe. If we continue onwards, you'll see that, let's say he sues Daredevil. Daredevil can say, well, self-defense, he was attacking me. If you watch the sequence of the TV show, he wasn't really attacking Daredevil. He was actually going after Foggy, and then he kills 18 people. So, not defend yourself, what about the defense of others? Right? Heroes are always defending others. That's sort of the paradigm of being a hero. You defend others before yourself. Would that work? Sometimes. The answer is sometimes. It's not always, seen, but it can happen. Now, in terms of Bullseye suing, there are cases where people who are up to criminal activity, for example, robbing someone in their house, and they slip on the ceiling and fall and get hurt, they can actually sue the homeowner for not maintaining the house in a safe way. It seems preposterous, but you say, well, they were in the middle of a criminal act. That would usually be thrown out under 403 because it's too prejudicial. So, can he sue? Yes. There are some cases where people have won lawsuits like this. I think it would be unlikely here because there are a lot of damaging facts. But the law is one of nuance, and it is possible.
It depends. The eternal lawyer answer.
It depends.
All right, Matt, tell us about the significance of Red Hook as a free port.
Sure. So Red Hook, so the grand scheme of the Fisks is to operate much of their criminal empire through Red Hook, which Matt and Karen learned is a free port when looking through the charter. They also realized that in the charter, according to the charter, all federal, all state, all local laws are exempt. So is a free port really like, say, Tortuga from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies where anything goes? Short answer, no. So free ports do exist in the world. There's many throughout the United States. Although actually free ports is an antiquated term. They're now considered foreign trade zones. And they are governed by the federal government. You might say, well, there's that charter, but really the courts would not give any respect to that because it was done by the state, and the state can't overrule federal law, and really they can't exempt anything unless the legislatures come in and pass laws providing exemptions, which very unlikely that happened. And so yeah, foreign trade zones are covered by 19 U.S.C. Section 81A through U. And basically 81C of that says that all merchandise that's brought into a foreign trade zone basically no customs laws apply, which means when merchandise comes in, there's no tariffs, there's no taxes, no duties, other types of fees, but all other laws apply. And although being exempt from customs laws in a foreign trade zone sounds really exciting, really the second that the merchandise leaves the foreign trade zone and goes into the United States, then all those customs, tariffs, import fees then come into play, and they have to get paid before they can actually leave Red Hook. So like Vanessa Fisk, for example, she has a bunch of art in Red Hook, and when she has to sell that, actually retail activities specifically prohibited in foreign trade zones, and so the art needs to get moved, probably move to her gallery, in which case she'd have to pay any fees related to that. So one question is, why would you use the foreign trade zone? It's really basically to either defer the costs of import fees or maybe try and even lower them. It's really about managing import fees, so nothing that exciting. Nothing prevents the Fisks from engaging in any sort of nefarious activities, but if they did engage in criminal activities, hopefully they get caught and definitely go to prison, at least until the next season.
Yes. All right, Judge Chu, back to you. So I would never start a business with Karen Page because she always acts like she's going to cry, and I would be worried that I was defending her at all times. But Nelson and Murdock did. So let us know, can they do that with a questionable person?
So this is an interesting question. It really depends on a couple of things. What is Karen Page? I don't mean that in a physical way. She's not a lawyer. Because typically you have to be licensed and pass all these standards before you can be an attorney. But she's not a lawyer. She's a secretary. She's a paralegal. A paralegal is above a secretary. They're actually training and a license for that as well. Is she an investigator? A private investigator? There's a beyond license process as well. The reason, the thing we're looking at is it's a bit of a sliding scale. So the higher up you get, the more regulation there is, the more you have to do training-wise to pass for credentials, and the more authority you have to enter into these sort of partnerships whereby you can run a business and earn money. There are a lot of regulations. If we look at how things are handled sort of in real life, typically the rule is going to be that if you want to have an ownership interest in a law firm, you probably should be a lawyer, because that's what most people think. Now, one question, does anyone think any state in the country has actually allowed non-lawyers to become an owner in a law firm? Who says yes? Can anyone guess the state? Arizona. Very good. Arizona leads the path on this. Whether that's good or bad, I guess time will tell, but Arizona became the first in 2020 to allow a non-lawyer to become an equity owner in a law firm. And more recently, we've seen the regulations relax where accounting firms are now starting to get into the business of law. Very briefly, it's a nuanced argument again. The reason people say that non-lawyers should be allowed to own law firms, have ownership interests, is because they can then bring down the cost of legal services and make it cheaper for people. If people don't always have to hire the $1,000 an hour lawyer, if they're hiring someone lower on the totem pole, we can get to deliver those services to people who need them more at a lesser rate. On the other side, though, is, well, if we are letting sort of people practice law without a license, how do we regulate that? And isn't there a danger of abuse, or perhaps the practice is not going to be high enough, there could be malpractice issues, things like that. So it does depend, but not in Arizona anymore.
Yeah, it depends everywhere. So, Michael, Matt does a lot of things that should probably get him disbarred. But among those seems to be a questionable understanding of attorney-client privilege. So let's talk about it.
Sure. As the attorney-client privilege, it protects communications between the attorney and the client. The goal of it is to allow open and honest communications between the attorney and client so the attorney can provide the best advice possible. It never expires. And really, the main benefit of this is for the client, which makes sense since they're providing a lot of confidential information. They would want that protected. Going hand in hand with the attorney-client privilege is a duty of confidentiality that state bars impose on members of the bar. So Daredevil is in New York, and so Rule 1.6 of the New York Rules of Professional Conduct precludes an attorney from knowingly revealing confidential information unless the client gives informed consent. Disclosure is impliedly authorized and is reasonable under the circumstances, or falls under certain exceptions listed under 1.6b, but none of which apply in this case. So, Matt revealed in open court that Hector Ayala is the white tiger. Did he breach his duty of confidentiality when he did that? Well, the information was protected by the duty of confidentiality, and he did not give his prior consent. So, yeah, Matt did violate the duty of confidentiality. The other thing going on was that prior to the trial, Matt filed what's called a motion in limine, and the motion in limine, it's a pretrial motion a party files to exclude evidence from the trial. Guess what was excluded from the trial? Any evidence about Hector Ayala being the white tiger. So basically, when Matt reveals this in open court, he managed to piss off his client, the prosecution, and the judge, which from a dumpster fire perspective is actually pretty impressive to fail that spectacular. not if you're being represented by that person. So the question is, did he act reasonably under the circumstances? He tried and argue that, for the prosecution, Officer Powell testified credibly. His star witness had changed his story on the stand, and his client didn't want to be convicted, so he needed a Hail Mary. So Hector ultimately did agree to disclosure after the fact, but we'll just pretend that didn't happen. What would the State Bar do? The State Bar would still find that was not reasonable. And the reason why is because the motion in limine said you can't talk about this. And so even if, no matter what reasonableness he could try and argue, he wouldn't get very far. And the sad thing is that if he'd done things a little bit differently, he actually could have done everything he wanted to do and not gotten in trouble. What he should have done was asked for a recess and got consent from the client, and then requested a hearing outside of the jury with the judge and make his case, and hopefully the judge would allow it, and then Matt could just basically proceed as he normally did. Otherwise, Matt risks being disciplined by the bar and kind of contempt by the judge. But on the other hand, in the comics, I believe Matt's been disbarred at least twice, maybe more. So, not an unfamiliar situation to him, but still not a position you want to be in.
They keep knocking him out, he keeps coming back. It's fighting forever. So, Judge Nicholas, talk to us about this very casual list of crimes.
Before I do that, I have to say that I'm sorely disappointed. I'm jealous of Judge Chu and Judge Owens yet again. Their families are happy about them being, they're proud about them being, and my kids are in the back hiding.
Point it out.
Yeah, so, we all know what a bank robbery is, right? You go in, you take some stuff that doesn't belong to you. It's kind of like when you reach in your mom's purse to get some extra change because you know she's got some. But what other crimes do you think might be going on there? And don't cheat, don't look at my slut. What other things? Anybody? Any hands? Anyone going to be brave?
Are we talking about mass actions or just the general scene?
In general, the bank robbery in general.
I mean, possession of a firearm, breaking and entering, stuff like that.
Excellent. And Matt can do things blind. I am blind. Everybody agrees. But there are a lot of crimes that you have to take into consideration. So under 18 U.S.C. 2113, bank robbery, anyone who uses by force or violence or intimidation, takes or attempts to take anything from another while they're in a bank or a credit union, ends up being a bank robbery. One of my favorite lines from the episode deals with another crime, which is the felony murder rule. So how many of you remember Matt? He's sitting there and he's like, hey, you don't want to kill anybody because then that gets you 15 to 25, right, on top of anything. And felony murder under Section 125.25 in California amounts basically to murder in the second degree. So if you kill anyone while you're committing a felony, bam, there you go. You got your felony murder. And then also, when you receive property or conspiracy. So you might think, oh, I'm going to have conspiracy to commit a murder or commit a felony. In the episode, we see that they have a plant inside the bank who's kind of tipping them off, and that would constitute a conspirator. Oddly enough, impersonating an officer when they're making their escape, they dress like New York police officers. Under California law, that would be a felony. Under New York law, it's only a misdemeanor. But the feds make it absolutely not a crime unless it's a federal officer. So.
All right. Judge Chu, tell us a little bit about Heather Glenn, who apparently is the only therapist in New York City. Was she obligated to report suspected criminal activity for patients?
So, good question there. We're getting into the privilege issue, which, as judges know, can be a very thorny and a very nuanced area. So, privileges. We have the attorney-client privilege that we probably all know about. We see in movies and TV. Physician-patient privilege, which usually covers medical conditions. But what about a therapist-patient privilege? Would that typically protect communications between the patient and the therapist? So I think I see some nodding, yes, that is a privilege. But what if the patient reveals to the therapist that they are contemplating criminal activity? They're thinking like, oh, I may knock over a bank, I may rob someone, I may want to hurt somebody. At that point, is the therapist obligated to report that? Who thinks yes? Who says no? Oh, okay. So this is a controversial area of law, so we can move forward a little bit. But I think one of the different characterizations of the comic and the movie are in the TV show. But there's a real-world example, a very famous case out of California called Tarasov, where a UC Berkeley student named Tatiana Tarasov was killed by someone who was stalking her and was also seeing a therapist where he reported that he was thinking of harming her. In that case, the therapist actually did contact some of the campus police or campus security, and they detained the individual for a little while, but then he appeared to be lucid, so they let him go, and a few weeks later, tragically, he killed Ms. Tatiana Tarasov. After that case went all the way up to the California Supreme Court, and it was a very dicey issue, but ultimately the California Supreme Court said, so again, the question, is a therapist obligated to report when a patient is contemplating criminal activity? California Supreme Court said yes. So a lot of therapists were worried and saying, well, hey, how are we going to have these protected relationships now? And the court said, we are carving out a narrow exception. If someone else is in danger, credibly, you've got to report that. So in the years since Tarasov, the profession was watching this very closely, worried that this would upend things. But it has now become pretty much the law of the land. Many states have followed California, including New York, in finding that if a patient is contemplating criminal activity to a therapist and they report that, the therapist has in turn also report that.
Well, thank you for that. All right, so Judge Najera, was Hector Ayala's acquittal jury nullification? Tell us all about it.
Before I do, I'm going to tell my kids I'm not going to embarrass them. So now let's start really easy this one. But let's talk jury nullification. Let me ask you, how many folks in the audience were, after seeing Daredevil, seeing the acquittal of Hector Ayala, a little surprised by that verdict? Raise your hands. Come on, let's see. I'm surprised. Okay. Well, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what it means when a jury comes back with a verdict that people think maybe is in defiance of the law. And specifically, there's a big question of whether or not, in this case, the verdict that the jurors rendered in that case, in the case of Hector Ayala, was in fact a true legal verdict. Jury nullification, as defined by New York, is when a jury acquits a defendant despite evidence proving guilt, based on the juror's belief that the law is unjust or improperly applied. When the facts seem to allow for no other conclusion but guilt, and the jury comes back not guilty, that is considered jury nullification. Let's move to the next slide. Now, there are many attempts to circumvent this that are built into the system. First of all, jurors take an oath as a panel, an entire group, to follow the law. Then we have jurors taking an oath as individuals jurors to follow the law. And finally, or the next section we have, or the next fail-safe we have, is Bullseye, which is a system whereby each attorney will question the jurors individually to determine if they're the type of juror who will try to go against the law or not follow it. Apart from all of that, attorneys will also file motions to determine and prevent one side or the other from arguing things that would lead jurors to perhaps not follow the law. So in the case of Hector Ayala, was the verdict a product of jury nullification? That's the question. And the answer turns on the issue, do the facts allow for no other conclusion but guilt? Let's move to the next one. Well, let's see. Everybody who saw Daredevil, I want you to forget what you saw as viewers. And we're going to talk about just what the jury in that case saw. And let's think about this. The prosecution put on one witness, and only one witness. And that witness testified, that was Detective Powell, and he testified that he was in the subway with his partner. It was New Year's Eve. They were out there, basically patrolling for people who would be drunk or perhaps high or just being unruly. So you would think that they would be armed with batons, rubber bullets, tasers, spray, all of those things that normally officers carry in that situation. Now, he claims that they see this van running at them, and he is, crazy, and they have time to identify themselves, but they don't pull out their guns, they don't pull out their tasers, they don't do anything. Now, nothing, I should say, that Detective Powell testifies to is corroborated. There's no corroboration. It's a simple testimony of one witness. Now, the law says that the single testimony of one witness can prove any fact, provided that witness testimony is credible and reliable. It must be credible and free from irreconcilable contradictions. Well, as you can see, there are many irreconcilable contradictions in this story that Detective Powell tells. Somebody's running out of nowhere. They don't behave the way one would expect them to behave in that situation. And most importantly, there was nothing to corroborate that Hector Ayala was on drugs at the time. And that's an important point that they discussed but never really hit home. And that was something that Matt Murdock should have hit out of the ballpark. That was his biggest piece of evidence. As I said, I'm kind of wondering about him as a lawyer, but
Don't fire Matt Murdock.
I know. The defense put on Hector Ayala. Now understand, Mr. Ayala took the stand and gave a credible story. And he does not have to prove his innocence. The prosecution has to prove his guilt beyond reasonable doubt. He takes the stand. He is corroborated. He is corroborated by Michael Burgos and Gianna Moreno. His story about I come to the aid of people in need. Now, New York's standard for proof beyond reasonable doubt is proof that leaves you so firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt that you have no reasonable doubt. In California, we call this an abiding conviction to a moral certainty. Move on to the next one. Now, you folks have all been presented with the facts in this case, and you've heard the law of reasonable doubt. If I were to ask you to vote, how many of you have reasonable doubt as to Hector Ayala's guilt? Raise your hands. Ooh. Okay. How many of you don't? Raise your hands. That is absolute proof that there is no jury nullification, because you've all followed the law. There is a reasonable belief that it happened when Hector Ayala said it did. And when it comes to interpreting the facts, that is entirely in the purview of the jury. So if you interpret the facts any way you want, but you follow the law, it is not jury nullification. Yay! Hector Ayala has been saved!
So we have about 10 minutes left, so I want everyone to speak like Frank Castle and chasing him down. So let's move on to Kingpin, played by my favorite, brilliant, sure singer who can sit up here. Katrina, can a mayor declare martial law asking for a supervillain?
So again, those subtle questions. Can he? Yes, he did. Does it exceed his authority? Absolutely. So generally, no. Mayors cannot declare martial law. Their authority is limited to more local stuff, so they can declare local emergencies and issue curfews and take like general civil safety actions, but martial law is not one of them. However, in 1871, the mayor of Chicago voluntarily placed the city under General Philip Sheridan's control after the Great Fire. So it wasn't legally mandated, and it was certainly a rare exception, but it did happen. The mayor did once declare martial law. So typically, going quickly, federally, a president and as the commander-in-chief can declare martial law in extreme cases, such as invasion, rebellion, insurrection. We're told Fisk's goal is to complete as many crimes as he can and to get rid of the vigilantes, which is certainly not any of those categories. An example of that would be Lincoln during the Civil War. He declared martial law and sanctioned arbitrary arrest and detention, suspended habeas corpus, and he initiated trials by way of military tribunal. And one of those cases made its way up to the Supreme Court, in Ex parte Milligan, where martial law, the court held that martial law was confined to areas of military operations where war really prevails. So it can't be imposed when the civil courts are actually functioning. So that made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. They looked into whether it was constitutional for Lincoln to commission the military proceedings, and it was not, and they got off. State-wise, it's the governor. If the state law allows it, each state has different laws and thresholds, but again, it's like civil unrest, natural disasters. An example of that would be Hawaii after Pearl Harbor, and they were actually in martial law for up to 3 years. It didn't get repealed for a solid amount of time. But generally, yes, it's the state governor and then the federal and president, because you need to have control of a militia in general in order to activate it.
Makes sense. So, Judge Najera, in 2 minutes or less, please explain one of the most probably misunderstood concepts in all of the law. You got this.
Quick question. How many attorneys are in this audience? Okay. What did you all, some rhetorical questions. What did you all think of them at that trial of Hector Ayala bringing in, 10, 20, or 30 police reports and saying, here, this is evidence. Let's examine it and use it as part of our case and argue it. And that was great for White Tiger, and it made us all cheer. But the problem is we have this right embedded in the 6th Amendment of the Constitution to confront and cross-examine our accusers. Now, we could argue that, the person being accused was, in fact, Hector Ayala. But it kind of goes over to all different parts of the trial. Each state, because this is so important, each state has codified this concept from what's known as the law of hearsay and its exceptions. Let's move on to the next one. The 6th Amendment explains that the accused shall enjoy the right to be confronted with the witnesses against them. And in Crawford, they talk about it's the purpose behind the creation of the statement that determines the status, whether it's hearsay or not. Next. Now, the only exceptions, and there's an exception that actually in New York was highly litigated at the turn of the century. This was the business records exception. And in the business records exception, they talk about which record, if you make a record of an event in the course of business at or near the time of the event, and it's recorded in a way that is deemed trustworthy, this is an exception. And there was a lot of argument all over the country, but specifically in New York, I'm going to talk about the case there, where they talked about whether a police report could be a business record. And ultimately, in the case cited up there, Johnson v. Lutz, which is now a bedrock case, by the way, in New York, they said specifically police reports are inadmissible hearsay because they're based on statements from third parties that were not provided during the course of a business as part of a business duty, because being a police officer isn't a business. So it might be a duty, but it's not a business duty. So it's very clear that those police reports were hearsay with no exception and never seen the light of day in that courtroom, ever.
Some marital issues in this show. If they get divorced,
it's my favorite couple. All right, how many of you all think that they're going to stay together? By a show of hands. Yeah? All right. Well, if they don't stay together, and we can go to the next slide, you know, it is a thing. In family law, there's far less law, there's a much smaller body of law than in criminal law or civil law, because most times it's based on fact-specific findings, and it's in equity. We want to do what's right. We want to do what's right by people, otherwise they end up as criminals. So if you take all of their property away. You'd be surprised to find that New York is not an equal distribution state like California. Instead, it's an equitable division state. So kind of what that means is, you kind of do what's fair to return the parties back to where they were before they got married. But in both states, in both California under Family Code Section 2550 or the New York Domestic Relations Law, if people get divorced, say our very beloved Vanessa and Finch decided they just can't work it out, you have to decide first, when is the date of separation? When are they going to leave? Is it right before Fisk comes back? Is it after he becomes mayor? And then once you determine that, you have to determine which of their assets were part of an illegal form or an illegal activity. And then they run into the issue of seize and freeze. This is one of my favorite things. So if by chance I'm married to Mike here and he illegally acquires this Funko, I don't get to claim in the courts. Criminal courts, you can't take half of this away because it belongs to me. It's half of my marital assets. Instead, the government gets to take it all. If, on the other hand, we're able to establish that this Funko doll we got this together before his criminal activity, back when he was working as a plumber, not even a union plumber, then I'm entitled to one half of it. But while he's in prison, I can't waste it. I can't.
All right, Judge Nicholas, Wilson and Vanessa.
Exactly. But in California, in the marriage of Rossi, it said, hey, look, an innocent spouse can't profit off of the legal gains. So basically how this works, we have soda. Yeah, you stole it. I'm sorry.
I came by it.
Right. So I can't say that half of it is mine and can't go to the government. However, if we're in California and it's all legal, then he gets half, I get half. In New York, they might say, Mike, you don't look thirsty. She looks thirsty. I'm not talking about our dating life. And so basically, that's how it is. But in the end, and we can go to the next slide, I truly believe that Fisk and Vanessa are going to stay together.
I was asked at the start if we had any unexpected giveaways, and I said no. All right, so Katrina, back to you and back to Fisk. Can he use the NYPD as his first defense product?
So yes, he can, and he does. And I previously mentioned that you needed to be in control of a militia in order to activate it, and that's kind of what limits the ability to declare martial law. And Fisk does have a cute little militia here. Fisk does have a cute little militia here in Punisher merch with their Punisher tats. He's weaponized the NYPD, and in doing so, he has broken all of the laws. Ethics laws, the Constitution, state and federal criminal statutes, like conspiracy, RICO, bribery, deprivation of rights under color of law, extortion, murder and attempted murder, kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment, and at least official misconduct, which is a Class A misdemeanor in New York. We do actually, unfortunately, have a real-world example of this as well. There was a group of Milwaukee policemen that called themselves the Punishers, and they also had Punisher merch and Punisher tats and stickers on their lockers. So we got to see this actually play out in the real world. They were acquitted on the state level, and then they were federally indicted for a few of those things I mentioned before. 7 of them ended up being convicted for conspiracy, deprivation of rights, and then I think it was battery and the like. And then the person that they beat and tortured and stomped and stuck a pen through his ear sued the city for $30 million for civil rights case. So money damages as well. In real life, he's probably likely to be fired, likely sued, and potentially prosecuted, Judge Owens.
Which leads us to.
All right. Well, the thing I love about this show, Daredevil, it's obviously fiction, but like the best fiction, it does a wonderful job of illustrating real-world problems. One of the best I've ever seen. So let's go to one clip there. He's the mayor all of a sudden. So how is he not in jail? Well, let's look to history. Because there actually have been figures like Kingpin, who everyone knows is a bad dude, everyone knows is a criminal, but they don't go to jail. So, Whitey Bulger. Those who might be familiar with him, he ran the Winter Hill Gang in Boston. He murdered, racketeered, you name it, he did it. So, why was he not in jail? It's because of this guy. One more click. Well, it looks like a little off. Here we go. That's Whitey Bulger. On the right, this guy, here we go, John Conley. So John Conley was a longtime FBI agent who cut a deal with Whitey Bulger in exchange for Whitey Bulger giving him information about the Italian Mafia, which then the FBI used to destroy the Italian Mafia in Boston. In exchange, he would give Whitey Bulger a heads up when the feds were coming. He would make sure Whitey Bulger did not get convicted. If you've ever seen the movie The Departed, that was based in part on Whitey Bulger. The movie Black Mass, not as good as The Departed, is also based on this whole scenario. This is very similar to, let's go to the next slide. Here we go. Poor Ray Nadeem, right? Now, Ray Nadeem is more sympathetic than John Conley, but he did make the same deal. He made the same deal with the Kingpin, that the Kingpin would provide him with information. He would use it to go after gang figures, and we know how it ended for Ray Nadeem. Not well. So what if Ray Nadeem had survived? And what if Ray Nadeem had actually testified in court? Well, here's the problem with that, if we go to the next slide. There's a long history of police officers who have engaged in misconduct which leads to the overturning of criminal convictions. The Rampart scandal in Los Angeles, which was the basis of the movie Training Day. This guy, Rafael Perez, led the crash unit in that area. Over 100 convictions overturned because they were based on either evidence he gathered or testimony he gave. Once you have a dirty cop involved, it's almost impossible to sustain those convictions. And here's probably a better example. Mark Furman from OJ. Yeah, exactly. Bad guy. Found OJ's glove. Wrong guy for LAPD to find OJ's glove. At the trial, we heard about all the misconduct that he committed, and not surprisingly, we had an acquittal in that case. So even though Kingpin is obviously fiction, it does a wonderful job of capturing why someone like the Kingpin who crushed that guy's head in the last episode, like, this is Disney Plus, and he's crushing someone's head. It's like, next up, Moana. You know, a little surprised by that. But it does a great job of capturing those issues. So yes, the answer is there is a reason why Kingpin's not in jail, because law enforcement blew it.
Dirty cops are dirty.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, well, that is all of our content, so we have time for questions. But first, round of applause for our I'm a super proud New Yorker, and so I love the street level hero aspect of Daredevil. So I have two questions. One is, how does Daredevil's status as attorney / simultaneous anonymous, basically sanctioned vigilante have client privilege? And another question is, how does the state-specific law of New York shape the flavor of the plot of the series, how things unfold? Ooh. All right. Who wants to take attorney-client privilege? Michael, you handled that presentation. You want to do that one?
Sure. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question about attorney-client privilege?
Yeah, just like Daredevil's an attorney, but
Right.
he's also an anonymous vigilante who comes into contact with people, information, whatever, at the same time. So I was just curious how that intersects.
Oh, you mean like with the super hearing? Everything, or it's...
Just however, whatever you feel like talking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, it's actually, that's one of the things I love about him in the comics, is that, he's he's an attorney by day and he's a vigilante by night, and so he can actually like help people. For example, like Gladiator, when he basically was able to get him, he was probably going to go to prison for life, but he was able to basically help him out and get him mental health. And, so then he go open the store making costumes. And so I think having that knowledge does kind of, it's, as far as like, with Gladiator, he's not the client until Matt goes into the jail and basically says, I'm here to represent you. So anything before that, because basically with attorney-client privilege, you need to basically have a person who's seeking an attorney in a confidential conversation and actually seeking legal advice. And so when you're a vigilante swinging around, beating people up, they're usually not asking you for legal advice.
I do think it'd be interesting if it was a prosecutor, like if it was flipped, because there's a lot of fruit on poisonous tree that I think would be happening.
And he was a prosecutor. I think actually that's part of what got him. That's part of what got him disbarred, was because basically.
Oh, that's right. I do remember that.
Yeah. So.
And we might not get to part 2 just so we can get to some other bonus questions. But thank you.
Hello. What does real world law say about vigilantes themselves as folks acting outside of the appointed law enforcement to, help others or go after those who do bad things?
Don't do it.
In New York, and I forget what the comic styles, but they were
The guardian angels.
Yeah, the Guardian Angels, and they were. I remember back in the day, because I was a prosecutor here when they were going strong, and they committed crimes, they were being prosecuted, so don't do it.
Don't do it. That's what the law says.
The idea generally is we don't trust private citizens to take the law into their own hands. We will trust police, law enforcement, because they're sworn, they're trained. That's the idea. There are some limited exceptions where people get away with certain things, but don't believe Liam Neeson and Taken. Not a great idea.
Yeah, well, the comics make it easy because, we know Daredevil's a good guy, we know Batman's a good guy, and so when they go beat somebody up, that's them doing, a good service, but it's a lot murkier in the real world, and, motivations are never clear.
Thank you.
Just a practical question for those of us who are admitted. Do we get CLE credit? Are we accredited?
Not yet. Good question. So my question is what are your thoughts / how realistic is how the Frank Castle trial in the original show was going on?
So, that's very similar to people who remember Bernie Getz from the 80s. There are some striking similarities. Bernie Getz was someone he was a vigilante riding the subway. I believe it was 3 teenagers approached him, threatened to rob him, and he pulled out a gun and shot 2 dead. I think 1 was paralyzed, and he was a classic case of self-defense. That's what he argued. Ultimately, he was actually acquitted, if I recall correctly, and this became a seminal case for the concept of self-defense, because the idea is, yes, you can defend yourself, but it has to be proportional to the threat. So if someone comes at you with a knife, you're not supposed to whip out like a machine gun or a bazooka. It's no longer proportional. But one of the lasting effects of the Bernie Getz case was that many of the public supported it because they thought, hey, we don't feel like we're safe. So is it realistic? It's possible. There are some real-world precedents for that.
All right, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more. So, and I've also, sorry to interrupt you, I've also been told attorneys in the room get us your bar numbers, and we'll see what we can do about the ceilings.
Hi, in the comics, there's this rule where, like, Spider-Man can testify with his mask on and be like, I'm Spider-Man. Is that, I'm from New York, is that, like, in any universe?
I can take that.
No.
Well, actually, in national security cases, the answer is yes.
Okay.
There's a very rare exception in national security cases where a witness actually can be masked. It's extremely rare, and the Supreme Court has set a very high standard for it. So basically the answer is no, but in some cases, yes.
It goes back to confrontation clause. Everybody has the right to confront and cross-examine those who are testifying against them. And that's really gone with the children. So they were trying to make it so that children wouldn't have to testify against their perpetrators, but they never could.
We have a great Daredevil costume.
Yeah, Matt. We got Matt Murdock behind you. Mr. Murdock.
I'm sorry, we got the not an okay to continue sign.
Why don't you come up and talk to us?
Yeah.
Well, come talk to you. Yeah, come talk to us.
At this point, to object.
Oh,